Editor's note, this podcast picks up about 5 minutes into Pastor Coleton's message. We had an error with the audio and missed the first 5 minutes, but enjoy the rest of this wonderful message.
Fear steals the ability for us to trust God and do things His way because we think like His way is difficult, His way is different than my way. I have a fear that if I do it His way, it'll be worse than my way. Fear steals our ability to love people because instead of loving them, you fear them, so you question them. I don't trust you. If I put myself out there, what if I'm rejected? And so I'm not able to put myself out there in love because I'm nervous and I'm scared that I actually will be rejected. Fear consistently steals the light that we're actually supposed to offer the world. That there's a God that you can trust in, that you don't have to share the fears of the world. It's supposed to be this thing that Jesus is like, you get to live in a space where people look at you and be like, what is that? Like you don't share any of our worries. You don't share any of our fears. Why not? It's like, well, the person I follow rules the universe. And so I think I'm okay. Like I think that's the idea that Jesus was supposed to give to us. And so fear steals all of those things, and it's the one ingredient that steals all that stuff. So it makes sense. The most commanded thing in the scriptures, the thing that he says the most is like, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Fear not. He's constantly saying that to us. God does not want us as a people who follow him. He doesn't want us to be afraid because it leads us to a space where you can't actually follow him. You can't press into those things. And so what I want to look at today are 3 ways of battling our fears. And overcoming those things. And without it sounding self-helpy. I hate self-help sermons. I'm not preaching one today. That's not my goal. But there is this space in the disciples where they are so fearful. And the reason is because they're lacking in these 3 ways of actually overcoming fears. You don't see what I'm about to talk about. You don't see any of these things in their lives. And you see Jesus trying to lead them into this space. And because it's not there, they're fearful. And so for us, I want to look at 3 ways of battling fear so that fear genuinely no longer has a grip in our lives, so that it's not the thing that defines our journey or guides our direction, but it's something that we experience and go, I see it for what it is, and I'm going to move forward anyways. And so 3 ways of battling it, okay? Not a self-help sermon. All right, first way of battling your fear is we need to elevate our view of God. Elevate our view of God. We need a higher view of who God is than we have of the things that actually scare us. The problem with the disciples is they had a small view of Jesus, just a very low view of what he was capable of. We see it in verse 47 through 50. It says, later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake. He was alone on the land. Jesus sees the disciples straining at the oars because of the wind, and then shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by, but when they saw him, they literally see him walking on the lake, they thought, he's a ghost. And they cried out, because they all saw him and were terrified. And so their fear, if you notice, their fear originates from having a small view of what is possible for Jesus to do. Jesus can't walk on water in their minds. And so even when they see him walking on water, like, that ain't him. That's not, I don't know what that is, but that's not him. They're out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. Once again, they've had this experience before. The wind and the waves are churning up, and they're like, it's happening again. Like we're going to be in another tsunami storm thing, like it's going to happen again. But they have to be thinking, last time Jesus helped us, but last time he was in the boat. He was actually here with us. Now he's on the shore praying or something. I don't know what he's doing. Like he's not here with us. And so for them, they see their situation, and in many ways I think that we do the same thing. We see this situation and go, this one's different. He helped us last time, but I don't think he can do anything here. Jesus is powerless to do anything in this situation. God is powerless to do anything in this situation because this situation is different. This situation, this circumstance is worse than it was last time. God could help us last time. He can't help us this time. This one's bigger. Their view of Jesus is he can't help us out here, and they have zero expectation that he can do anything in this situation. And we know that because, again, even when they physically see Jesus walking on the water, their minds don't go, oh, thank God. Jesus is here. They go, oh, look, a water demon that looks like Jesus. That's like, to them, that's more reasonable. It's probably some random spirit, like just walking, that just transfigured into the image of Jesus, and it looks like him, but it's actually not him. Like they just cannot, it's so far from their view that Jesus could ever walk on water that they have to make up some other thing. It's like, he can't do that. And so what is this? Well, the most logical thing is water demon. That's the thing. William Lane, in his commentary, talks about their issue, and he says, the disciples had no categories for understanding Jesus' presence with them right there. That is why they displayed not confidence and joy in Jesus' unexpected presence, but faithless panic. They didn't have a view of him that's like, I bet he could just do whatever he wants. And so what they should have done, if they had a high view of God, they're like, I don't even know if he sees us. And it's like, oh, actually, he did see you, and he's actually come to rescue you. And what they should have done is been like, look, not only is he coming towards us, he's walking on the waves that we're afraid of. They should have responded that way, but they had zero, their view of him was high, but it wasn't as high as it should have been. It was too low for that. He cannot do that. And they decided for God what God could do versus allowing God to tell them, this is what I can actually do. And so because of that, they were overcome with fear. That situation, this thing is scary, and it's bigger than Jesus. Even God can't help me out here. And effectively, their fear came down to the question, who do you think God is, and what do you think is possible for him? Their fear begins and ends not with how big the fear is. It has everything to do with who do you think God is in this situation, and what do you think he's capable of? And because they answered incorrectly, they wound up in a space of fear. And fear took over their reality. Jesus is standing right there, and instead of living in the real thing that's actually happening, their reality becomes a more fearful one. And then it just grows and grows and grows and grows. Now I'm not just scared of the waves and the water and the wind. I'm scared of the water demon walking towards me that looks like Jesus. Like their fear just takes a life of its own. And it's a fake reality. It's not even real, but they're making up a reality that's different than the actual reality, because that's what fear does. It leads us into a space where ultimately it takes us into a lie. And then we believe that lie, and it takes over. I think this happens to us all the time. We face problems in our lives. We listen to the news. We face difficulties, struggles, and I'm not denying those things. The disciples were actually facing something difficult, but we face those things, and if those things tower over our view of God, fear is the only logical response. So if those scary things are bigger than our view of him, and he isn't in control of those, he can't do anything in that space, then it actually makes sense. You should be very afraid. At the end of the day, our fear doesn't come down to how big the issue is, though. It comes down to our view of how big God actually is. Consistently, that is where it is. We have fear when it is bigger than he is, when he is too small for those things. This is why A.W. Tozer said this. He says, the person who comes to a right belief about God is relieved of 10,000 temporal problems. The hard thing is, he goes on in this, but his whole book is knowledge of the holy, trying to get us to actually have a picture of God that's worthy of him. And the problem is we don't actually see him correctly. We have a wrong belief of God. We have a small one instead of a big one. And the disciples who lived with him had the exact same thing. The tragedy of a low view of Jesus is it leads us away from the truth. Again, you see this in the disciples. For the disciples in verse 47 and 48, what we know is that Jesus had seen them. It says Jesus saw them straining at the oar, so he sees them, and then he goes out to them. He's actually done that thing, and he is able to do something because when he enters into the boat, everything turns to peace. And so that's the reality, but the fear itself led them to believe, like, he doesn't see me, he does not care, and even if he did care, he can't do anything about it. And so it just steals from them this thing that they were supposed to live in, this confidence they were supposed to. They should have been in the boat going, I know he sees me. He told me that he was going to meet us on the other side, so I know I'm making it over there. I know that I'm not going to be stuck here. I know that's going to be true. And they should have seen him and been like, of course he's walking on the water. The man can do anything. We need a view of God that's worthy of him. It's a view, in my experience reading the Psalms, a person who does it really, really well is King David. David had this view of God that was, I think all of us should lean towards and aspire towards. Look at Psalm 27 here. This is how David views the Lord. He says, the Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Who should I be afraid? He's the stronghold of my life. When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it's them who are going to stumble and fall. Let's go. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I'm going to be confident. For in the day of trouble, he's going to keep me safe. He will hide me in the shelter of his tent. He will set me high upon a rock. So I will remain confident of this. I'm going to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That bro was not afraid. Like he just had a different view of God. It's like, the enemies are coming. What should we do? It's like, watch this. Like he just knew, he had this thing that like the Lord is going to protect me. And I feel that deeply in his heart. And he wrote this down all the time. Just like the one who delivers me, the God who is an adversary against my adversaries, but the God who is an advocate for me. And so we need this type of confidence. We need a view of him like that. Seeing him high and lifted up in a space where it's like, does he love me? Yes, he loves you beyond compare. He gave his life for you. Can he do things? Is he powerful enough in this? Does he still rule and reign? Yes, he still does. We need a view of him like that. We need to think of him in a way that's worthy of him. We need an elevated view of God. So that's the first. One of the ways that you get an elevated view of God, or two ways really, are the next two things. They're separate in their own right, but they also would build into an elevated view of God. So that's the first. We need an elevated view of God. Here's how we get it. We fix our eyes on the truth. That's the second thing. Fix your eyes on the truth. I said it already, but the disciples are believing a lie. Believing a lie. Verse 49 and 50, they see Jesus walking on the lake. They thought, it's a ghost. And they cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. William Lane in his commentary says this about this, why they thought this. Says the disciples reacted to Jesus' appearance with terror, convinced that they had encountered a water spirit. The popular belief that spirits of the night brought disaster was a story in the rabbinic oral tradition. So basically, they've just been listening to a story. It's the same for us just listening to the news. Like they've just been listening to the news, and the news has scared them. Anybody? Like this is what's happened. They've just heard a story that they've never actually experienced whatsoever, and it's not actually happening in their time. And they're afraid of something that they've just heard that's taken over. And they have their eyes fixed on the news and not on Jesus himself. And it's shaping everything that they see. Their fear is based on a lie. And so what Jesus does is he tries to fix their eyes on the truth. Verse 50, this is what he does. He says, immediately, you're believing a lie. Immediately, he spoke to them and said, take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid. You're believing a lie. It's terrifying you. You need to be reminded of the truth. And then he gives them the truth and says, you do not have to be afraid in this space because I'm right here. Don't be afraid of the lies that you've heard, the fears that are filling your mind. Fix your eyes on what's true. This is what he's constantly trying to do for them. Look at me. It is me. Focus on the truth here. Again, David does this so well. I love Psalm 11. I love the Psalms, but Psalm 11 is such a good description of like how King David does this because he is talking about people in his life that are telling him to be afraid. And you're going to look and see what they're saying and just notice where their eyes are. And then you're going to see David's response and you see where his eyes are. So Psalm 11, David says, in the Lord I take refuge. He starts again. How then can you say to me, flee like a bird to the mountains? And then here's what the people are saying. Because look where their eyes are. Because look, the wicked are bending their bows. They set their arrows against the strings to shoot them from the shadows at the upright at heart. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? And so notice, their eyes are not just like, there's an enemy out there. It's very specific. They have studied the enemy. They are bending their bows. They're placing their arrow on the thing. Like they are like very specific, studying the enemy. And then David, very specific, has studied the Lord. And the Lord, he says, the Lord is in his holy temple. He hasn't moved. My foundation can't move because he's the foundation. He cannot shift and change. The Lord is on his heavenly throne, foundation secure. He observes everyone on earth. His eyes examine them. The Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates them with a passion. And on the wicked he will rain fiery coals and burning sulfur. A scorching wind will be their lot. For the Lord is righteous. He loves justice. And guess what? The upright will see his face. And David just fixes his eyes on something true and something real. And so when the lies are coming in, you should flee, you should be afraid, you should focus on the enemy. He's like, I'm not going to focus on the things that you're afraid of. I'm actually going to keep my focus on actually what's true. The Lord is in his holy temple. My foundation is secure because he cannot be removed from his throne. David has fixed his eyes on the truth. Jesus is trying, in this particular space, Jesus is trying to do the exact same thing for the disciples, getting them to focus on the truth in order to fight against the fears that they have, because our fears are lying to us. And so we need to fix our eyes on what's true in order to move us past our fears and move us towards a space where we actually experience some peace. Sorry, I'm in my head going, should I tell a story? Should I not tell a story? I'm going to tell the story. Same as 2 weeks ago, like I never tell the story well, so just follow me. Worked at a church years and years ago and left that church to go to Chicago. And for so many years, the church was really great. And left that church and got a new job in Chicago at this other church. Rainey and I were about to be married, and I got this job, which was a real gift because I was still in seminary, a full-time job at a church there. And for some reason, the elders of that church didn't like our family. Honestly, in some sense, we weren't perfect in those situations, but like they made stuff up about us, and they were going to send the elders up to that church in order to try and get me fired from this job. And I would talk to somebody that was in, kind of running that and a part of that, and he was like, man, I've tried everything, but they are hell-bent. They're doing this thing. They're coming up there. They're going to meet with your pastor, and their goal is to try and get you fired. And I was like, what did I do? And he was like, it doesn't matter what you did. They're just angry, and it's not really even about you. They're just angry. And so that was the news. It was like, they'll be there tomorrow. And so I tell Rainey, and it was very emotional because we felt like this job is going to be like a launching point for our marriage into this space, and it was going to be great. And it's just hard to hear that church people, Christians, if you've ever been hurt by church people, join me. But it was this space where I was like, man, they're going to come up here, and they're going to ruin this great opportunity that's happened for me. And so I was afraid. And we were sitting there in Panera parking lot in Chicago, about to go in and eat, and we had no money. Like, it was like, this is going to be a full-time job. It's going to change our whole lives. Like, we're going to go from, like, how much food can we get? Like, we'll split a bowl of soup, which I hate splitting food, y'all. Sitting there in the parking lot, and then we just start talking back and forth. It's like, well, the Lord has only ever been good to us. Like, my relationship with Rainey was like, of the people I could possibly marry, she was beyond the 10 of everyone in my life. And I'm like, I'm going to aim high because I had proud parents, and I just think I deserve more than I'm worth, And so I just aimed as high as I possibly could trying to get Rainey. And just like, I know that the odds are not in my favor. If this was Hunger Games, I'm dead first. It's not. That was sorry. The odds are not in my favor. And then the Lord just did a thing. And like, it made her fall in love with me, which I don't even think he can force her to do, but like it worked, right? And like, we're together and we're going to get married. I'm like, oh, I was 6 months away from locking this down. And so it was a space for me where I was like, man, what a gift. The Lord has always been good to us, and he's done miraculous things in our lives. But one of the things that we eventually, like, he has been good to us. And a couple of things that we said was like, I'm afraid, but if the Lord wants me to have this job, there's nothing they can say. There's nothing they can do. And so you don't need to be afraid, because if he wants you to have this job, they can do whatever they want. I mean, they can, but if he has opened the door, they cannot close it. And so let them come. They can do whatever they want. And I was like, just remind yourself of the truth of that like, let them come and say whatever they want, because if he wants me to have this job, they will fight against him and they will lose. They cannot do it. And then if the boss does believe the lies and I do lose this job, then the Lord is going to care for me in the same way that he's cared for me the last 24 years of my life at that particular point. Like, if he allows that to take place, and like he's been faithful before, he'll be faithful again. This is who he is. And so we said that to one another, and then we went in and ate our $2 soup or whatever, and just had some peace and some rest in the midst of some fears. And then eventually we got a call that night, and they were like, hey, we're not coming. It was from one of the other guys. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was just for us, like, one, a space of worship where I was very thankful, but it was also a space of like, see, this fear was lying to you. And for me, it made me feel like they have control over my destiny. And I had to be reminded, what's true? It's like, they are not in control of your destiny. They can't get you fired if they want to. They can get you fired if the Lord goes, yes, I will allow it, because everything bows the knee to him, and everything has to go through him. And so it was just a space for us of like, just reminding ourselves of the truth in the midst of the fear. But the fear gets so big, and it so disillusions what we can see, to where they see Jesus and they're like, it's a water spirit. And it's like, no, it's him. And he's going, no, focus on the truth. It's me. I'm here with you, and I'm here for you, and I have come here for you. That's what's true. And so in our fears, we need to fix our eyes on what's true. Where our eyes are fixed determines where our emotions rest. And so if you want to know where your emotions stay, if you're afraid, it's likely that your eyes are fixed on the fears and not on the God who is ruler and reigns above all those different things. All right, that's number 2. Number 3. To battle our fears, we got to reflect on past deeds of God. It's another thing that we did during that particular time at Panera, but reflect on past deeds of God. Mark points us out that this is something the disciples did not do, and they should have. Verse 51 and 52 says, "Then Jesus climbed into the boat, and the wind died down. And the disciples were so baffled, they were beside themselves." Some of your translations may say that they were amazed. It's a bad translation. It does mean amazed in certain spaces, but when it's used negatively, it's what Jesus' parents and brothers, when they say that he's crazy, they use this exact same word. They're like, hey, he's messed up in the head. That's what they're saying. And so what Mark is trying to say about the disciples here is not that they're amazed in wonder, but they're actually like beside themselves in fear. It's like, what the heck is happening? I'm confused. And so they were baffled and they were beside themselves. For they did not, and here's why, they did not consider the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. N.T. Wright says this. He says, Mark seems to be stressing Jesus' sovereignty over the natural world, and that if the disciples had reflected on the loaves and the fishes, they might have realized that water wouldn't be too much of a problem either. Like if they have just processed this thing that just happened, Jesus just fed 5,000 plus with 2 fish and a couple of loaves. If they had reached back into redemptive history and pulled that forward into their current circumstance, they would have seen Jesus walking on the water and been like, this lines up. This makes a ton of sense. He's a crazy guy. I don't know. He'll do anything. I have no idea what he's going to do. He wants us to feed 5,000 plus with a couple loaves and some fish. Like, this is wild. Of course he's walking on water. And N.T. Wright, Mark is making that point. They didn't consider this. And because they didn't consider the past and bring it into their future, they're completely confused and they're riddled with fear. They had seen Jesus cast out demons. They'd seen Jesus heal the sick. They had seen Jesus regrow limbs and facial parts of a leper. They've seen Jesus raise a dead girl to life. They'd seen Jesus feed 5,000 plus with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And because, as Mark says, they didn't consider any of it, their best guess was when they see Jesus, I think it's a water demon who looks like Jesus. That's their best guess. And it's like, it's because you did not consider any of the things that's happened in the past. Any of the miracles didn't come to their present circumstance and inform anything. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner says this. He says, in the study of knowledge and epistemology, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, it may or may not make a sound. But he says it does not work that way with miracles. Spiritually, if a miracle happens and no one takes notice, it did not happen. If no one takes notice of what God has done in your life or in history past, if he does something for you and you miss it completely, it's as if it didn't happen at all. It makes no noise in your heart. It does nothing for you in your present. And that's what Mark is showing here. Because they did not consider it, it had no effect on their fears. It had no effect on anything that they were dealing with. According to Mark, what's available for us is an arsenal of stories that are weapons against our fears, past stories that need to be brought forward to inform our current fears. Things that he's been faithful to do before that he has promised, I will be faithful to do again. And Mark is saying the disciples didn't do that, and so fear is winning, and it's taking over, and it's leading them to a space that's a non-reality, not the actual one that they live in. Fear is winning, and it shouldn't be if they would just consider the loaves, if they would just consider what had happened in the past. And so for us, I think we need to establish this practice of drawing upon our history with God. And if you don't have one, start marking one down. Drawing upon your history with God, drawing upon past faithfulness in order to relieve our present fears. Past faithfulness to relieve present fears. Charles Spurgeon talks about this, and he says, we need the common habit of pleading past mercies as a ground for present favor. Review our Ebenezers, or times and spaces where God has broken in. Review our Ebenezers and take comfort from them. It is not to be imagined that he who has helped us in 6 troubles will leave us in the 7th. God does nothing by halves, and he will never cease to help us until we cease having need. He will never cease to help you until you cease being in need. And so that's who he is, and we need to have this common practice of pleading. You have done this before. I'm asking you to do it again. And you are the same then as you were today, and I need that to happen again in my day. To me, and just in my experience, and I think just in my life, how we normally try to calm our fears is not by looking in the past. We try worrying forward. We try and look to I have an Enneagram 6 wife, who I love and is more spiritual than I am. But in this space, like one of the things that sixes do is they naturally consider all the negative possible outcomes that could possibly happen. Okay, this is how people, I think how many people do it. We worry forward. We consider the negative possible outcomes. We consider all the worst case scenarios so that we can be prepared, so that we can avoid those things. And so we look to the future and go, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And we try, based on that, to actually calm our fears. The issue is you are using worry to try and stop your fears. And all you've done is add worry to the fear that you did. All you did was take a bad thing and then just add another bad thing to that thing. Worrying forward doesn't take away your fears. It just adds worry to your fear. And what Mark is saying, that in order to battle our fears, we need to look backwards in faith, not forward in fear. The way that you actually conquer these things and not be ruled by them is not trying to figure out how you can avoid the fearful things in your future or in your present, but to look back and go, what did he do before? What did he do in my life? What did he do in their life? What did he do in the scriptures? What did he do in spaces like this? And then grab that thing and pull it to the future and say, like, I'm claiming the promise that you have done this before and you will do it again. Versus going like, I don't know, maybe he will. I don't know if he's the same. I don't know if this is the same situation. Mark is saying you should consider the things that happened in the past. Bring them to your current circumstance. Allow those things to inform your fears and to not have your fears inform what God can do in that particular space. This is what he wants for us. Use our past in order to inform our present. Frederick Buechner, in his book, The Hungering Dark, he says, one life on this earth is all we get. Whether it's enough or not enough, that's all we get. And the obvious conclusion would seem to be that at the very least, we are fools if we do not live it as fully and bravely and as beautifully as we can. I love that quote. I think it's really beautiful. But I think if we have fear ruling and reigning in our lives where Jesus should be, fear will steal that from us. We'll wind up at the end of our lives going, not saying, I was too trusting in God. We'll say, I think I was too afraid. I think I feared too much. I think I worried too much. I don't think any of us at the end of our lives would be like, I should have worried more. Look where I'm at, death. We will be doing the other thing. And fear will just steal the life that Jesus wants us to have, the one that he's inviting us into. And this is why God commands more than anything else, do not be afraid. I know it's scary, but do not be afraid in this space. Don't let it win out. Fear, psychologically, they say it's the most powerful emotion, which is why people use it to manipulate people. And what I find so interesting is, and especially in the church, it has been used, fear has been used in the church to try and scare people towards Jesus. So we talk a lot about hell in order to get people to like, you scared? You want to burn? Like, no! Like, and then you run towards Jesus, but not because you love him, but because you're terrified of the other thing. And yet, like in the scriptures, the most commanded thing is like, I do not want to manipulate you by fear. I don't want you to make a decision. Jesus is like, I don't want you to make a decision about me in fear. The number one commanded thing from God, and Jesus is like, do not be afraid. I'm never going to use fear to manipulate you. I'm better than that. I actually have something greater for you in that. You can actually experience the freedom and this love and this confidence that David has, where it's like, if an army comes against me, I still will not be afraid. This is what's available. And so for us, I just encourage you, go to war against your fears because they're not the thing that's supposed to win in your life. You will enter into fearful situations, but they're not the thing that's supposed to define your journey. Elevate your view of God by focusing on the truth of who he actually is and remembering what he has actually done in the past, and who he has been before is who he will be again. Jesus wants to ultimately get us to the place where we're like the people of Gennesaret, this tiny little thing that ends the chapter. I want you to see the difference. This is what it says. Look at the difference. They landed at Gennesaret, anchored there, and these people recognize Jesus. They actually see them. The disciples see him face to face and like water demon. These people recognize Jesus. They recognize him, and notice the change. They ran throughout the whole region, carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he went, villages, towns, countrysides, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. Then they begged him. Then they used their past history. They begged him to let them touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. They remembered the story of the woman who had touched the edge of his cloak and was healed, and they're like, I want that same God I want the one who did it there, I want it here, and I want to touch the cloak just like she did. I want that thing. They grab a story from redemptive history, pull it to their present, and they're like, we want the same thing. You are the same God. We want the same thing. And for me, this is where Jesus wants to get us. They recognize him. They have an incredibly high view of him. And instead of running away from their problems, they start running into the region looking for problems to bring to Jesus. It's the very opposite way. The disciples are terrified and their problems are huge. And these people are like, let's go find more problems. Let's go find more sick people. Let's go find more diseased people. Let's go find what else can he do? Like, let's just bring whatever we possibly can to Jesus and just see what he does. And nothing to them is too big for Jesus. They just bring it all to him. And everyone who did this stuff, everyone who was brought to him was healed. So this is what Jesus invites us into. I don't know your fears. As I stand here right now looking at your faces, which is hard for me to do and preach at the same time because I get distracted. Some of this, in my experience, when I talk to people, not in this church yet, I think this is a way of life. I think you actually can live this way. I think this is the way that Jesus called us to live. I think there's a new way of living that's available now in Jesus that we can really live like David did, where it's like, man, regardless of an army, whatever's coming at me, like I do not have to be afraid because he is with me. Valley of shadow of death, no big deal. His rod and his staff will comfort me because they'll protect me, and he is with me the entire way. And yet, in your life or in the people I talk to, this sounds super naive. It sounds super far-fetched. It can sound like, that's crazy, that's stupid, you don't know what I'm going through, and I don't. But I am called to like preach the Bible, and like this is what is real, this is what's in there, and you are supposed to be set free from a thing. Perfect love drives out fear, and he is perfect love, and he perfectly loves you. And so there's this space where it's like, well, I think this is just the way life is. I'm just going to be afraid. That's not supposed to be true. That's a lie that you might be believing, but that's not supposed to be true. Well, you just don't understand that actually is true. I don't understand what you're going through. I don't know how afraid that you are, but he does. And just in the disciples, like he sees your heart. He saw the disciples struggling. He sees you're struggling. He has come to you to do something. And he actually does want to meet you where you are in the midst of those things so that they don't drive your life, so that you can actually enjoy the brave, beautiful life that he actually, one life, this is what you get. You get to walk in the freedom that he has purchased for you, this love that he was willing to give his life for. And so wherever you are, whatever you're dealing with, and you're like, I don't know, like maybe you just receive it, and Lord bless you, thank you that you receive it. But if you're battling it, it is in the text. And if you call yourself a Christian who believes the Bible, this is for you. It's supposed to be freedom for you, where you see it and hear it and go like, oh, I thought I had to live this way. And it's like, you don't. You don't have to live in that. I'm not saying you won't experience scary stuff. You just do not have to live in fear. Gennesaret is something that's available to you. Jesus invites us into that. So elevate your vision of God, fix your eyes on him, and remind yourself of what he's done, because who he has been is who he will be. He's been faithful before, and he'll be faithful again. Now, I want to practice this real fast. And so if you would just humor me and close your eyes and bow your heads, maybe relieve your hands of whatever you're holding. Worship team, you guys can come on up. There's rarely a time where we're silent. Normally, when we're silent, our fears and our worries are the first things that we think about. So I just want to ask you the question that I asked myself this morning. What are you afraid of right now? What fear do you have in your life? And then what is that fear doing to you? What are you afraid of? What is that fear doing to you? And then I want to say to you what Jesus says to the disciples. In your fear, in the spaces where you're scared, Jesus is saying what he said to them, I am here with you. He's saying, all the things that you're afraid of, bow the knee to me. Nothing rules or reigns over me. I rule and reign above it all. You do not have to fear because I am with you. And what he's saying to you is different than what he said to the disciples. He's saying, I have not crossed just the sea to get to you. I have crossed over death to be with you. I have conquered not just waves, but a cross. You do not have to be afraid because I am for you, I am with you, and I rule over everything that's making you afraid, so trust in me. Do not be afraid. It's me. I'm with you. Lord Jesus, would you set that in our hearts? Fear robs us of everything that you have for us. And so you say from beginning to end, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Fear not. It is me. I am with you. And God, that's never been more true than today because of what you've accomplished for us. And so God, for fears about what people think about us, fears about the government, fears about job security, fears about relationships, people we love that we want to see healed or come to faith, or all the different things. God, would our vision of you be greater than those things? Would our hope in you be placed in who you have been before, and that's who you're going to be now? And God, would you just help us to have your word, what's true, placed before our minds and in our hearts so that our fears don't win and don't rule. That we won't get lost into a lie. And Lord, would you help us by your Spirit in us? Make us courageous. Help us in our fears. In Jesus' name, amen.